welcome into this edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast, the September 14th edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. And with me, as always, Zack Hubbard joining us today. Zack, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. First of all, where are you staying at, man? Are you safe? Is everything good with the storm so far?
Everything is pretty good so far here from Hurricane Florence here in western North Carolina, around the Triad, around the Winston-Salem and Greensboro area. It's pretty good right now. Seems like most of it is near the coastline right now, but most of North Carolina, it seems, is safe for the moment. But I'm certainly safe right now. Hope you are too.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So, we'll talk about, the game being canceled a little bit down the line, but we're going to start by talking about last week, the East Carolina game. Just to kind of open us up, what were your thoughts, sitting there and what honestly probably seems one of the most disappointing losses in program history, probably right up there with the 1999 loss to Furman?
Well, people have certainly compared it to that Furman loss, and I think it's along those same lines, mainly because this was not a good ECU team. ECU was 130th statistically in defense last year, so dead last in defense, and held our offense to 19 points, and then had tons of success against a defense that looked pretty good against Cal the week before. So this was definitely a disappointing loss, and just from sort of the eye test of looking at how the game was played, it really looked almost disaffected, almost like the players did not want to be there, did not want to get involved. It was really a hard game to watch if you're a Tar Heel fan.
Yeah, I can agree with that, especially I thought the biggest thing that turned the game on the offensive side of the football was the ejection of Antonio Williams. I think we can kind of all say, now that we've had some time to kind of step away from the situation, the in-game situation, that was probably the right call that they made to eject him from the game. It was kind of an unfortunate, call because the defender, Colby Gore, gets tripped up by his own defender, and Antonio Williams comes in, kind of got the helmet-to-helmet contact. But at the same time, that's something that they're trying to take out of the game, so it's a little bit understandable. But, it seemed like after that point, and I don't really know why, because I thought Jordan Brown was very effective in the carries that we saw. They kind of went away from it. Was that kind of the turning point offensively for you as well?
I would certainly say so, just based on how well Antonio Williams was doing in that first half. Had almost, 70 or 80 yards, had a couple big runs there. So really had some great success early in the game, and then it just seemed like either for one reason or the other, the offense just stalled without him. And I think it's a couple different pieces there. I think probably the offensive line played a little bit better in that first half than they did in the second. I think that probably play calling was a little bit different, though I would not say that play calling was particularly great in either the first or second half. And I think also maybe the pass game just kind of fell to the wayside there. It really seemed to be a little bit more successful maybe in the first half. So I think kind of those factors all together really of the team playing almost two completely separate and different halves play more of a role than Antonio Williams. But he's certainly a piece in there and would have been a big weapon for that offense to have.
Yeah, you mentioned the offensive line. I thought overall the unit was better than the first game against Cal. Especially for having a center in there in walk-on Jonathan Trull, who I thought for the most part did well up until late in the game when there were a couple of snaps I think that got away from him. I thought in run blocking situations they looked really good. I thought pass protection, they had some of those moments again, but I felt overall they did a pretty good job of protecting Nathan Elliott. Am I the only one that feels that way, or do you think that the offensive line really took a step forward?
I think they certainly took a step forward. They definitely played better than they did against Cal, and I think a lot of people, offensive line, in my opinion, to the layperson, is one of the hardest positions to read on the field. It's usually not where you're looking. You're usually looking where the ball is opposed to the offensive line. It's really only a position that offensive linemen can correctly assess. And Mike Ingersoll of Inside Carolina in the podcast they did this past week has basically said, the offensive line has done a pretty good job through the past 2 weeks. He really didn't see as much of an issue. And to an extent, I kind of have to agree this past week. I thought, like you said, they were a lot better in run and pass protection outside of the two bad snaps from Jonathan Troll. He did a pretty good job stepping in for starting center J.J. McCargo, but for some reason or another, despite their efforts, they still were not getting it done. They quite often got in, second and long, third and long situations, and then mainly the pass game was just too maybe inconsistent.
Right.
For the efforts of the offensive line. I think that was more of the issue than anything, is that though Nathan Elliott had more success passing the ball, over 200 yards passing, no turnovers, no interceptions, anything like that, it just didn't seem like they could regularly convert on third down, on third and long. They were still throwing those, 50-50 balls to Anthony Ratliff-Williams, or they threw some to De'Ami Brown. They were usually pretty well covered. And then another factor is the referees were mainly letting these guys, receivers and quarterbacks, make contact with one another. They weren't really calling offensive or defensive pass interference. So it was really just go up and make a play against your man for most of the game. And most of the time, the ECU defensive backs won those battles, one-on-one kind of battling out with the wide receivers. So, like I said, against the Cal game, which they put this in a little bit more versus ECU. I would like to see that short or intermediate passing game a little bit more.
Right.
I think that kind of suits Nathan Elliott's skill set more. I think he's more of because of the mechanics he has, it takes him a little bit longer to pass. So if you can give him a shorter distance to throw to, that will help out his skill set. And they did some of that, but they kept on throwing these 50-50 balls, and they would lead to repeated 4 and outs. So that was the main issue that I saw offensively.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the main things, and I talked about it a little bit with Sam Doughton, who the listeners will hear just a few minutes after this. When I look at it, I don't understand why there are so many deep passes that are built into this offense right now, because Nathan Elliott is not known to be a great thrower of the football when it comes to those deep, even down the middle of the field in those deep situations. He's that guy that can really dink and dunk, and we saw that last year. And I mean, sometimes people say, well, they don't really like that aspect of an offense. Dink and dunk is not going to win you games. I don't necessarily think that's 100% correct. I think you can win games with that style of offense. You just got to be really, really good at it. But the thing is right now, the deep passing game just is not working. De'Ami Brown is struggling really to create separation against some of these college corners who are a little bit faster than some of the guys that he saw at the high school level. And that's going to happen because he's a true freshman. Anthony Ratliff-Williams is a go-up-and-get-it type of guy. And we saw, like you said, once you saw some of those intermediate, those 15-yard routes, maybe even some of those 12-yard in routes, that's where he started to sort of get things going. And that's what allowed him to start to get himself going. I think one of the other guys that needs to see a little more time out there is Rontavious Toe Groves. We were kind of wondering coming in just how healthy he would be. Through the first 2 games, I would say he's probably been the second best receiver on the field for Carolina at the wide receiver position. I mean, he has the second most catches on the team. Now, that's not really saying much. That's only 4. But at the same time, I mean, when I look at it, it's just no one else is really emerging. And it's kind of shocking because, you felt like there was going to be someone else that would emerge. I think part of that is that the slot receivers really aren't able to get the football all that much because a lot of this stuff is going down the field. And, I don't know. Maybe that's not quite how they're trying to build it into the playbook. Maybe that's just what Nathan Elliott is seeing and trying to get the ball out quickly so he's feeling safer with the lob passes. I don't really know, but it's kind of frustrating at this point with a quarterback that really just has struggled throwing the ball downfield. And like you said, I want to see more of those shorter routes, those 5-yard routes. Allow these guys to create. You've got Daz Newsome for a reason. I mean, we've seen some of what he can do in space on some of these punt returns. You've got Thomas Jackson who, he had 4 receptions the other day, but it only went for 14 yards. And you can see why, because he's not really out in open space. And then, try some of these running back screens with Jordan Brown. You've got to get a little bit of better blocking, but this is what Jordan Brown is there for. He's one of those better receivers out of the backfield, probably in the ACC when it comes to running backs. So, there are some things that I think they can do to try to get this offense moving. And, of course, number one is to run the ball more. But we've been asking for that for years, and it just does not seem like that's what Larry Fedora wants to do. But, at the same time, when I look at it, I thought the offense at times looked better than it did against Cal. I still don't think it was a perfect overall performance. I think there's a lot of things they've still got to work on. But, this is the thing, and I'll ask you this question. When you look at Nathan Elliott, do you think that by this game getting canceled this weekend against Central Florida, do you think that this is going to ultimately hurt his case when Chaz Surratt returns to say, look, I've got this job locked up now that he's only going to have really one more week to try to prove that he is the guy?
It might hurt his case a little bit, and really the question also is, going into Pitt, which I'm sure we might talk about today or next week, is how much is Cade Fortin going to play? I mean, Cade Fortin got in late versus ECU, and, it wasn't really only threw a couple passes, didn't have great completion percentage because of that, and then was essentially throwing after the game had been decided, but looked pretty good throwing that football.
Mm-hmm.
Still looked like a freshman, but as Larry in the past has said, and has said this season, he likes to kind of experiment with his quarterbacks and see what guys have and kind of develop packages. So I fully expect to see Cade Fortin play more versus Pitt than perhaps we thought he would versus ECU or even versus Cal. And I think that hurts Nathan Elliott's sort of chances of locking down this job more than anything. Now, the number one thing for Nathan Elliott is to go out there and perform. I think that regardless of how many games that he plays, he has to go out there and prove to the coaches and to the team that he is the starting quarterback. And I'm not 100% sure that he has done that. He looked better this past week versus ECU, but still was inefficient, still not great in terms of completion percentage or accuracy. Threw more yards, certainly, and obviously dropped the number of turnovers, but there's still issues with the mechanics of throwing off the back foot. There's issues with seeing the whole field, making reads. There's really just limitations that he has that are hard to look at and say he's going to improve on those in one game. It's not impossible, but it's hard to look at what he's shown us so far and say, this guy's going to lock down the job when Chaz Surratt comes back. Now, we haven't seen Chaz Surratt play for a UNC team in a good while, probably since last October, maybe early November. We don't really know what he's bringing to the table. We don't really know what improvements he's made over the spring and the summer and the fall. We don't know what his mentality is after sitting out these first 4 games. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to look at. It's really hard to get information on that when you have a guy that's, that we knew basically back in February was going to be sitting out these first 4 games. So that essentially decided, at least in some part, decided the quarterback battle. But it'll certainly be interesting. I'm not going to say definitively that it's one guy's job or the other guy's job. I think it'll be another quarterback competition. And I think that there's some uncertainty at that position going forward into the season.
The thing about Nathan Elliott that I think really is hurting him right now is the footwork. He's really struggled getting his feet set in the pocket, really driving the ball with his back foot down the field. I mean, that's where a lot of these underthrows have come. And, part of that in the first game was because of the offensive line play. When there is you see these guys coming off the edge or coming through the middle on blitzes, yeah, your feet are going to get a little scattered. You're going to, trying to get the ball out. But at the same time, yeah, I kind of agree with you that it's going to be hard to kind of fix that in one game. Now, Pittsburgh seems to be one of those teams that you can fix it against because, as we know, Larry has had their numbers since he's came to Chapel Hill. And last year, the best game, I would say, overall of Nathan Elliott's career so far was against Pittsburgh because I know he played great against Western, but it's Western Carolina, and that's an FCS opponent. To me, the Pittsburgh game, I think, showed his leadership, showed his ability to throw the ball, the way that we know he is able to if he's able to settle himself down. These first 2 weeks, I think, have just been, they've been so tough for him. And here's the one thing that I still just don't get about what the coaching staff is doing. Led the team in rushing in week 1, and that was with 9 second-half carries because in the first half, they didn't use them. Then this week against ECU, the coaching staff gave him just 1 carry, and it was not even a read option. It was that quarterback basically draw where he basically fakes as if he's going to, look downfield, and then it's a quick tuck and run upfield. That was it the whole game. And to me, Nathan Elliott's that guy that he is a lot more successful throwing the football when he is able to get out on the read option. It's a very weird thing, but whenever Nathan Elliott gets hit, he seems to play better. I don't know why that is. That it's kind of just a funny thing, but it's whatever. I mean, if that's going to make him successful, I think the coaching staff needs to use him in the run game because to me, from just from last year, I think most of us can see that Nathan Elliott and Chaz Surratt are really not that far apart when it comes to athleticism. Everybody wants to think that Chaz Surratt is that much more athletic than really any of the quarterbacks that we have on the roster. I don't know about Jace Ruder now that he's there, but last year everybody wanted to say that Chaz Surratt was head and shoulders the most athletic guy at that quarterback position. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that Nathan Elliott is pretty close to him when it comes to athleticism, and last year he actually had more rushing yards than Chaz Surratt finished with. So I don't understand why they're not putting that in, but you're right, though. When Chaz Surratt comes back, and now with Nathan Elliott having just 3 games under his belt, if this team, especially if this team is 0-3, Chaz Surratt's going to get a long look, and there's going to be, I would be willing to bet he's going to see some time in that next game against Miami, especially because it's going to be a 5-day turnaround. But you mentioned Cade Fortin, so my question is, do you think that Cade has an actual chance then to potentially take away the starting job from both Nate and Chaz?
I think that's a big long shot. I mean, like I said, we saw his big arm, but we also saw a kid that looked a little bit nervous out there and a little bit wide-eyed, which is what you see from freshman quarterbacks. Right. I mean, that's to be expected. So while I don't expect him to necessarily go out and win the number 1 UNC starting job, I certainly think that he could play a big role in this Pitt game if Nathan Elliott struggles or if Nathan Elliott's not getting it done. I think that we could see a lot more Cade Fortin against Pitt than we perhaps saw this past week against ECU. But as of right now, no, I don't see him taking that starting job away outright with Chaz Surratt there. But like I said, I mean, we still have to see, basically going forward, once we have Chaz Surratt back, we have to see how all of these guys are functioning within the offense.
So here's my question, because I know that I know what I would do. Would you start Cade in this game against Pittsburgh?
I would be very hesitant to start Cade in this game, just because, I think that Nathan has earned the right to do so, and also because the main reason I think that he's getting as much time as he is because the staff trust him as an upperclassman leader, where it's harder to put that trust on a true freshman that hasn't played high school since, early fall of his senior year.
Right.
So I would not say that I would start Cade Fortin. I think, in my opinion, and I think going into the game, that it's fairly likely that he'll get significant playing time. I think they'll experiment with that. early in the game. I don't know how much time they're going to get individually. It really just depends on how each guy does. I think that at this point, after a few games, Nathan Elliott is going to have a shorter and shorter leash. He's going to have less and less opportunities that he can go out there and miss throws and not have this offense run the right way. And along those same lines, too, I think that adding the quarterback run will help either guy significantly. I think Nathan Elliott's probably better than that than Cade Fortin is right now. I think that's probably Nathan's biggest asset. And the reason, in my opinion, that it works so well is because when you add that asset of the read option, it becomes a true read option where either guy can carry the ball.
Right.
For most of the past two games, it's been well known that the running back's going to get the ball out of this option, and the defense can key in on that. And while some run plays are successful when they know where the ball is going to go, it really has allowed defenses to kind of take advantage of that and, have some more plays for loss, plays go for no gain, and stuff like that. So adding that aspect will make teams kind of respect Nathan a little bit more. It'll add a component to it that kind of frazzles the defense a little bit when you have that. It's one more weapon, basically, that you have within your offense. So I think that play calling will help either quarterback more, but as I said, I really don't know. I think that Cade Fortin's going to play quite a bit, but I would not start him.
Yeah, I said this after the East Carolina game. I think I would. I would throw him out there and just see, if what kind of spark that gives to the team. Clearly it's not a long-term thing, but at least I think at this point you've got to give him a chance, because from what we've heard, and this is where I think people are really, really frustrated with Coach Fedora right now. He said earlier last week that Cade Fortin can make every throw. And then we see the struggles from Nathan Elliott, and they took them so long to get Cade Fortin in there. I think that's where people are frustrated. If there's a guy on the bench that you say can make every throw, how is he not in the game? How is he not out there at least having some sort of impact? So, I think I'd give him a chance. Against Pittsburgh, a team that we've historically had some good success against. I think it's going to be, if I was the coaching staff, it would be a very run-heavy start to the game and give him a chance to sort of settle in. But I think, when I saw him throw the deep ball, it looked a lot more accurate. I think he stepped into a lot more of his passes. And, I know, there's a little bit of the wide-eyed factor, but we've seen throughout college football that, true freshmen, it's not quite as, looked down upon to start a true freshman as it once used to be. I mean, look in the ACC alone right now. I mean, Trevor Lawrence out at Clemson, of course, having a pretty big impact there. Now, he's not starting, but again, he's rotating with Kelly Bryant. And then, you look at guys like Sam Hartman, who's over at Wake Forest, another true freshman. So, these guys can come in and have impacts. And if Cade Fortin really can make all the throws like Larry says, I think why not? Throw him out there, see what he's got. Of course, Nathan Elliott will be there, and maybe you even run sort of a two-quarterback system, something that we've hated in Chapel Hill for a long time, but after, going with the one quarterback this year, I think people are going to say we don't hate it as much as we once used to. So, I would give him a shot. I would see what he's got. And, maybe potentially if he plays that well, he could be in that group that sort of battles it out, especially late in the season if, things get as bad as some fans think it's going to get, where, we could get 8 or 9 games into the year without a win. I don't know if that's going to happen, but, if it does get that bad, why not have the true freshman there that you can potentially put in and maybe find your quarterback of the future, something that a lot of people right now just, have a lot of uncertainty about with the two guys that were expected to battle it out here in the fall. So, we turn to the defensive side of the ball here. I looked at it as, a little bit of a confusing. I guess it kind of balanced out, what we saw from them in the Cal game. The run defense really, really struggled. there were a few times where guys just simply filled the wrong holes. Like on one of the touchdowns, I think it was the Holton Ahlers touchdown. J.K. Britt just, Cole Holcomb filled the B gap, and J.K. Britt came behind, should have taken the C gap, but instead tried to help fill the B gap, and it ended up leaving the C gap wide open. It was just miscommunications like that. A lot of big plays running the football as well, especially late in the game for ECU. And, to me, that's got to be a little bit concerning because of the fact that, we've seen how bad some of these run defenses have been at Carolina. And you're going up against an East Carolina team that has really, really struggled to run the football ever since Scotty Montgomery got to Greenville. So, when you were watching the game, what were your takeaways defensively from what we saw on Saturday?
Well, my main takeaways as a unit, I saw just a lack of focus and a lack of, intensity in your play, a lack of execution. And those are all kind of what we call coach speak. Those are all kind of vague terms. But by that, what I mean is I saw a defense that did not look interested in playing that game. I saw, like you said, guys fill the wrong gap repeatedly and just not make tackles, have a half-hearted effort to get to guys. There were several instances where you had pass defenders that were in pass coverage. They thought that they had made a play. They thought that they had deflected a pass or forced an incompletion where there was actually completion, and they would give up on the play after that. There was a strip sack by Alan Cater where the ball came out and the defenders didn't even see it. They weren't even going for the turnover there. So there were several instances where it just didn't look like the guys were playing as a unit. It didn't look like that guys were paying the most attention, didn't have the focus and intensity they had the week before. And I think it affected all three levels in a negative way. You start at that defensive line. The defensive line, I thought, played the best out of any defensive unit we saw on Saturday, but they certainly felt the loss of Malik Carney after his performance against Cal. They failed to have as much of a pass rush, and the main issue with that is that ECU's plan of attack was using, short pass and running plays just to get the ball out early, to take away that advantage. So not only did we not have our best pass rusher, but ECU also used an offensive plan that allowed them to kind of move the ball at will by using short passes and things like that. Mm-hmm. You go back from there, you go to the linebackers. The linebackers, I'm not sure if the linebackers were better than the secondary or worse. It's kind of neck and neck between the two because I did not see really any good play from any of them. I would probably say the linebackers did a little bit worse just because I saw them do less things, if that makes sense.
I got you, yeah.
They had less impact where the main issue in the secondary is they had those plays where they sort of gave up in pass coverage, and then they did get beat quite a bit. They mainly picked on guys like Patrice Renee and C.J. Cotman, and their quarterbacks had a pretty good day throwing the ball, too. There were some really good throws there by Reed Herring, the ECU quarterback. But I did see more from the UNC secondary that I saw from the linebackers, especially after the linebackers had such a good week. The week before at Cal, I really just never saw them affect the play. They were filling the wrong gaps. They really seemed like a liability in sort of that shorter intermediate pass coverage. So it was really hard to watch on the linebackers. With the secondary, like I said, they got beat, and a lot of those situations in which they got beat were either misreads by the corners. There were several occasions, such as last week, where the defense was playing sort of a soft coverage. So they gave up those kind of short underneath throws to not get beat by the long throws, sort of that bend, don't break philosophy that people have liked to attribute to the Carolina defense for a number of years. But then there were instances where defensive players made good tackles. I thought that really outside of one missed tackle, Miles Wolfoot, the safety, had a pretty good game. So did J.K. Britt. So I liked what I saw from the safeties. KJ Sales did pretty good the whole game. I thought that C.J. Cotman also had a decent game. It really just, he got beat on some balls that were thrown almost perfectly. So I think that there are still pieces here from this defense that really just had an overall bad performance. But, once they got behind on the scoreboard and once the offense just was not moving the ball the same way it was in the first half, you feel that sense of kind of maybe not despair, but kind of, what are we doing here? How are we going to get back from this? I certainly think that there was some kind of pulling back from the defense there in the second half, and that's to be expected when you're down big against a team that you were supposed to blow out.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I took away from it was really the lack of the pass rush really hurt this unit. And you mentioned, especially early in the game, they were getting the ball out extremely quickly. And against some of those cover 2, cover 3 looks where the corners are going to be backed off in certain situations, yeah, I thought they took advantage of that really, really easily. And once they got in a rhythm, it was really hard to get them out of a rhythm. Alan Cater, I think, really was one of the only guys that really provided a pass rush at all, and he was a bit hit and miss, but I thought overall for really what is his first start, technically, I thought he looked pretty good, but the rest of the defensive line, Jeremiah Clark, I think, had a pretty good day. We saw him in the backfield quite a bit. Jalen Dalton wasn't bad in run protection, but, when you look at, like you said, really that back seven, the linebackers, I don't think any of them had a horrible day. Really, they weren't put in a lot of coverage situations. We saw a lot of the nickel and dime packages on Saturday. I mean, there were plenty of times where both Bryson Richardson and Trey Morrison were on the field at the same time. And, from their perspective, I thought both of those guys had pretty good days. I mean, those are two guys no one's really talking about. But really, the slot receivers really didn't have much of an impact. I mean, Blake Prohl only caught one pass that I can remember, unless I'm just blanking on another one that he caught. But really, I thought ECU did a lot of their damage on the outside, particularly early in the game against Patrice Rene, who right now, he's really struggling. I thought, coming into the season, the seniority, I thought he got a little bit of a bad rap because of his freshman year, and you call it how you see it. That game against Georgia, I thought those pass interference penalties were, they were a little questionable, a couple of them. But, I think right now C.J. Kottman is the better player. I saw C.J. Kottman, on multiple occasions. He was right there with the receiver. It was fantastic coverage. He did everything he possibly could. But you mentioned a great throw and really just a great catch. Both times he had the ball caught over him by Trayvon Brown, who is probably going to be the next ECU receiver that's going to go to the NFL. So, I thought overall he looked pretty good. KJ Sales, he was thrown at 6 times and only had one ball that was caught. So overall, I thought they looked good. I thought the corners in general, outside of Rene, had a pretty good day. The safeties, they weren't bad. It just felt like on some of those deep balls, that Miles Dorn was really being missed back there, because I just don't think that Miles Woolfolk has that sideline-to-sideline type ability that Miles Dorn does. But at the same time, look, Miles Woolfolk, I'm with you. I thought he actually did pretty well, especially for a guy that last year when we saw him in the nickel cornerback position, he did have some troubles tackling in space. So overall, I thought it was a solid performance back there. But I just think once, like you said, especially in the second half, once that offense got going, that unit, I think they had just been out there for so long as well, and they started to wear down, and the lack of depth, I think, started showing a little bit there. So, it is kind of a break that, those guys will be back for that September 27th game against Miami. But, overall, I wasn't, I wasn't too discouraged. Some fans were like, well, same old defense. I'm not quite there yet. I think if, this team can get back to being fully healthy, if they can get back to having everybody on the field, I feel like, that first game kind of showed that there is a bit of a pass rush there. I feel like the interior of the defensive line is very good. and especially once Aaron Crawford returns. And then when you look at the linebackers and the secondary, I think the linebackers are still a little bit of a weakness just because of the lack of depth there, the lack of experience depth there. But the secondary, I think, they'll be perfectly fine, and I think they'll adjust. Against a team like ECU who throws as much as they do, you're bound to give up some yards. It's just, at the end of the day, you would have liked to see a pass rush that could have helped to provide that. But I think we'll go to special teams here really quickly before we'll then turn and focus on what was supposed to be this week's game. But the reason we got to talk about special teams is just because of Freeman Jones, because Freeman Jones has been fantastic. 3 for 3 the other day. So far, 4 for 4 on the season. Perfect. And, Freeman looks to be in a zone right now. At this point, I think he's a huge weapon for this team going forward. Do you feel the same way?
I feel the same way, too. And also about Hunter Lent, the punter that we saw quite a bit on Saturday. Mm-hmm. They've both been excellent for the special teams unit, punting and kicking the ball. And those are really big weapons that people don't think about. I mean, he's 3 for 3 on Saturday. That's 9 of our 19 points. Well, what did you say, 3 for 3 on Saturday?
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 3 for 3 on Saturday. That's 19 of your points, right, or 9 of your points right there. You're 19. Really just, and then with punting as well, people don't think about punting. That's what people in the industry like to call hidden yardage. If you put a guy at his own 20 as opposed to his own 40, that's going to significantly decrease their chance to kind of make that drive down the field and score points. So, those two positions, kicker and punter, are really right now, I would say, the two best that we've seen on the Carolina team, not because of any other position being particularly bad, but just that the punter and kicker have been very good and huge weapons for Carolina so far.
Yeah, I agree. And, that's kind of been a staple under Larry Fedora. I think it's not going to change right now. I mean, and that's what we kind of need, especially with the offense that has struggled the way it has. And, to have a guy that can flip the field position like Lent, to have the guy when you're in field goal range like Freeman Jones who can knock everything through the uprights at this point, that definitely helps. So, we'll turn to let's do this first. Larry, right now, coming off this loss, you had to have seen it. Everybody in Tar Heel Twitter Nation has seen it. There is a lot of frustration right now. And, we've kind of reached, I think, one of those points right now where you've kind of got to, take a look at where this program is as a whole. As you're sitting here today, Larry Fedora, how hot is that seat that's underneath him right now?
Well, I think the seat is about as high as you can get right now without an absolute move being made. I mean, like we said, this ECU game was going to be a crossroads for Larry Fedora and his legacy at UNC, and it certainly was not a good sort of note to have sort of here for his time here. There's frustration with players, both former and current. There has to be frustration with the staff to some extent. There's probably frustration with Larry himself. Now, I do think that it's a little bit hasty to imagine there being any sort of decision being made here in the season. Personally, I don't usually like those. You really only want to make those moves if you know who the replacement is going to be, right. Which I don't think that they do. I do think that they have started the process as low. I think they're certainly making a look, but I'm not going to say definitively what his job status is going to be come 2019. I do think that there's much more a barrier right now for Larry Fedora sort of to be successful this year than there was perhaps before. I mean, before we discussed, it's really just make a bowl game and then try to be competitive, with your in-state rivals. I think at this point it's got to be a little bit more than just a bowl game. It's got to be, a few more wins. And I think personally the biggest thing to kind of make or break Larry Fedora's year this year is going to be those two rivalry games. It's going to be,
right.
Duke and State, because as of right now, not only in playing the games, but in recruiting, UNC is losing in both of those fields. UNC's recruiting class this year, while there's guys we like on it, as we've said in previous podcasts, it leaves a little bit to be desired. I believe it's 66th in the nation, behind both Duke and State and even ECU. So there's certainly issues that we've seen recently with Larry Fedora over these past couple of years. And I think that, going out there and possibly winning at Duke and State are going to be huge for what happens in the future. I think those are sort of requirements right now for Larry Fedora. I can't say definitively, like many people have said in the past, that buyout, it's really hard to determine what the athletic director, Bubba Cunningham, wants to do. Because he's so new as an athletic director, it's hard to know the precedent there of what he kind of is looking for in this program. I think right now a lot of UNC fans, coaches, students are really looking at, what is the UNC program? What are the standards in place for how this program should be? And as of right now, I can't say. I think that might be a topic for a whole different podcast in the future, but there's a lot of people right now that aren't sure that Larry Fedora is performing up to the level that should be expected or even demanded of UNC football. So, as you said, I certainly think that the seat is hot, probably about as hot as it can be. But like I said, I don't think there's going to be any decision made here in the season. I don't think there's going to be any, interim coaches or anything like that, unless it gets really bad. If it gets really, really bad, like you mentioned, there may be something like that when it gets really, really bad like that, when you're looking at, a losing season or even 3-9 like we had last year or worse. If that becomes, your doomsday scenario, who knows what would happen at that point? The gloves are off in terms of what you're doing in terms of a buyout or an interim coach or things like that. But as of today, trying to be optimistic, trying to be hopeful, I would say that the decision will most likely be made after the season, whether Larry remains the coach going into 2019 in the future.
Yeah, no, you're right. There probably will not be a move in season, and that's because, like you said, you've got pretty much the only way you're going to make a move, at least this early in the season, is if you know that your future coach is on your staff. And I don't think that that's even remotely true. I don't think – the only one that I could think, if Larry was to get fired and if he was to reach that 0-9, 0-10 type mark, then they might move on and just have an interim guy for maybe the last 3 or 4 games of the year. At the max, I think probably 3 would be the max. I wouldn't even say 4. I'd say 2 or 3 games of the year. I would say maybe that would be John Papuchis, but there's no way that he is going to be the next head coach. It's going to be somebody that's from the outside. The only other way that you could make a move this early in season is if you were to get a guy that currently is not coaching. So a guy like Les Miles, a guy like Mac Brown, who a lot of Tar Heel fans want back, or a guy like Hugh Freeze, who had a lot of success at Ole Miss but has some of those concerns with the NCAA violations. You would have to convince one of those guys to not only take the job, but to take the job mid-season and take over a team that is not theirs at all and come in and try to, somewhat rectify what's going on and potentially get back to a bowl game. I don't see that happening. So I agree with you. And you mentioned that beating State and beating Duke is going to be the important part of the schedule for Larry Fedora. Those are the 2 most important games. You could not be you could not be more right. Those are exactly what that's what he's got to do. He's got to beat them, because now you are 1-3 against ECU in your career. You're 7-11 against in-state opponents that you've faced. And so far, you have a winning record against a grand total of 0 of those teams. So you've got to do something. I mean, State, I think, is a really big one. If you can beat them, that's huge. But to me, I think Duke is the biggest one for him, because it's on the road. And that team, while they are talented, I mean, they just lost quarterback Daniel Jones this past week, cornerback Mark Fields, who's one of their big-time players. So that team is going to be beatable. He's got to find a way to win that game. But, right now, I think, you got to kind of take it 1 week at a time. And I think the best thing that could have happened for really the entire program was for this game to be canceled, because it gives everybody sort of a minute to take a step back and potentially breathe and say, okay, what can we do to try to get this thing back on track? The players, the fans who, right now are still just some of them are still in an uproar. I think some of the people have sort of calmed down just a little bit. But, when I look at his overall job security, I think I'm kind of where you're at. I don't think his seat can get much hotter. I'm pretty sure at this point he's about at the point where he's going to, he's going to have to do something drastic, because, these people are just frustrated. And you look, like you mentioned, at the 2019 recruiting class. I looked at it the other day, and through 24/7 Sports, it's ranked as the 58th best recruiting class in the country. So, okay, it might be a little bit better than yours, but it's still not good. 13th in the ACC. The only team that is behind us is Syracuse, and that class, if I remember correctly, has 7 guys committed. So if they start getting more guys to commit, that class could even rank ahead of our class and put us last in the ACC. Which is not what we need. That is not at all what we need, coming off what was the best recruiting season of Larry Fedora's career. But you can see that 3-9 season is really hurting. And at this point, ranked 58th in the country, I want to just give you guys some perspective as to who is ranked ahead of the Tar Heels in this recruiting class. Of course, State's ranked ahead of us because they've had what has been a really, really good recruiting cycle for them. Duke is ranked ahead of us, which is not great, but at the same time, they've started to make some moves under David Cutcliffe. Wake Forest is ranked ahead of us. Dave Clawson's getting a little momentum going there. East Carolina is ranked ahead of us, which I don't really even know how to explain that. Now, this is the thing. If you want something to ease it just a little bit, Central Florida is actually ranked behind them in this recruiting class. They're only ranked behind them by 1 spot, but East Carolina has historically recruited this state pretty well. But at the same time, for them to be out recruiting Carolina, I don't think that's feasible. And then the big one to me, and the one that just blows my mind, is North Texas. They are actually out recruiting us. Seth Luttrell is out recruiting Larry Fedora at North Texas. And you might say, well, sometimes you want your former assistants to maybe be to get to that level where they can compete with you, or sometimes even be better than you in certain things like that. Maybe not on the field, sort of like, let's say, a Kirby Smart at Georgia. Well, there's a difference. That's a Power 5 school that Kirby Smart coaches at. Larry Fedora coaches at a Power 5 school and is currently getting beat by a Group of 5 team in North Texas that won their division 2 years ago, didn't win it last year. Now they're ahead of him on the recruiting trail. To me, that's just mind-boggling. Great job by Seth Luttrell. That's not a knock at all on Seth Luttrell. Seth Luttrell has done an amazing job in North Texas. The fact that, if you look at where they were before he got there, it's amazing. But Larry Fedora, to me, that's the biggest thing that concerns me is, on the field, the product has kind of, I wouldn't say slowly, it was a pretty quick turn, but it deteriorated on a little bit of a slower scale, as opposed to the recruiting, which literally has been like a flip of a switch. You went from the best recruiting class you brought in to the worst recruiting class that you brought in. So right now, there's a lot of concern when it comes to this Tar Heel fan base, and for good reason. I guess when I look at the situation going forward, it would probably be late in the year or after the year. So then you start to think of some of the names that come to mind. If you had to make the first call at the end of the season, let's say that we're sitting at the end of the season, who would your first call be with the guys right now that are probably going to be on the market?
Well, if I had to make a first call, it's really hard to say right now, because there are several guys that are that are Power 5 caliber head coaches, either former head coaches or current. So there's, like you said, there's the Mac Browns, there's the Les Miles, there's the Hugh Freeze. Some people have thrown around names at other schools like, PJ Fleck at Minnesota, Jeff Brom at Purdue. Some people have even thrown out James Franklin at Penn State. I don't think that's going to happen. People have thrown out Lane Kiffin. They've thrown out all these things. And probably any of those guys would be kind of your first call. But in terms of guys that I'm somewhat excited about, maybe some dark horse candidates, if I could go in that direction, are guys like Scott Satterfield out of App State, and then Mike Houston out of James Madison, an FCS program. And, people look at that, they say, oh, it's App State and it's James Madison. How can they really make the switch to the Power 5 level? And there's certainly that concern, but both of these guys have shown that they know how to run a program, they know how to get kids involved, they know how to teach fundamentals, and they know how to win, plain and simple. And, you look through how coaching ranks have gone in the past, a lot of the times guys that get the Power 5 jobs are not guys that have held those jobs before. I mean, every coach has to get the first Power 5 job. Nick Saban has to get his first Power 5 job. Urban Meyer, coming to Florida, got it out of a Power 5 job.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that were kind of at the top level of coaching college football have had to work their way through the ranks. So I don't think that Carolina fans should be hesitant to go to guys that are proven winners just at the lower levels. There's obviously still concern there. I don't really see any guy right now that's a home run hire. If the decision were to be made to have a new Carolina head coach, it's really just something that we'll have to wait and see who the administration reaches out to and see where the interest is. I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty surrounding the new head coach. I don't think that there's really anyone out there right now that's proven that in the current sort of era of college football that they're ready to win. So I think there's uncertainty there. There's uncertainty, like I said before, in terms of what the expectations and investment in the program is. When you look at how you're going to distribute funds, how you're going to, build a staff depending on, if coaches are retained from the current coaching staff, if there's a completely new staff, kind of how those things get worked out. So it's difficult to speculate. It seems more and more likely like those are going to be questions that we'll be asking this winter and then going into the spring as this new staff might end up being built. But it's really hard to say as of right now without knowing sort of who's on the market and then where the athletic director is looking at.
Yeah, Scott Satterfield, I think, is a really great name. He's a guy that was, he's pretty much born and raised in North Carolina, so he's a North Carolina guy through and through. And what he's done with App State, I don't think anybody can discount that. Yeah, you can say, well, that's a group of 5 school, but, they almost went into Happy Valley and won with one of the youngest teams in the country. So he's a guy that is really, really intriguing, and I know he knows how to recruit. It could be interesting to see what he could do if he was to come to Carolina. I know the names that everybody's going to want to start out with. First of all, okay, you can put the call into him. You're lucky if you get the man's answering machine. Bob Stoops is not coming to Chapel Hill. That will never happen. You look at some of the other names that we mentioned that are off the field. I feel like, Les Miles and Mack Brown, Mack Brown especially, he has been out of coaching for so long. The college game, you could say, well, we saw John Gruden come back to the sideline in Oakland. We don't even know how that experiment's going to go. But the thing is, with the college game, it adjusts so quickly. Just look at the first 2 games right now for Chip Kelly at UCLA. I think people thought he would come in and there would be some, almost automatic turnaround. Maybe not to the point of, UCLA competing for a playoff spot. But that was a guy that has not been removed for that long at all. And, when you look at what they're doing right now, it just seems like his offense isn't all that effective because people have adjusted to what he did. And, that's what we saw with Mack Brown and Les Miles. People had already adjusted to what they were doing back then. bringing it back out now, I don't think is really going to make that much of a difference with those guys. And, I don't know if either one of those guys has what it takes to sort of reestablish a program. It's going to take a little while, especially Mac Brown. It's going to take a couple of years to reestablish your way of playing, which is a lot different than Larry Fedora's. And really, the question is, does Mac Brown have that much time that he wants to put into this? Does he have, 5 or 6 years that he can put into, getting everything, eventually to work out the way that he wants it to work out? You mentioned there were no real home run hires. I think Hugh Freeze would be if there weren't the concerns with the NCAA violations, because, look at what Hugh Freeze did in the SEC. With Ole Miss, he had them, at one time number 1 in the country. And, when you look at it, or number two, that's right, because Mississippi State was number 1 that year. But, you see he's gone and beaten Bama, so this guy knows how to coach. It's really just the concern of the off-the-field stuff, I think, that, keeps people away from him. But, if you could overlook that, which I think would be very, very tough if you're Carolina, considering you were under the NCAA cloud for how many years? 7 or 8 at least. Probably a little bit before that, I would like to believe. I would assume that the NCAA was sort of sniffing around before that as well. But, it's kind of hard to say, just push that to the side and go and hire this guy. But, yeah, no, you're right. I think, it's kind of a wait-and-see type thing. I really do feel like more and more this is a conversation that we will be having at the end of the year. And, I think, it's kind of like any other time that you have a coaching search. You're going to have your list. You're going to have your guys that you really like. You're going to have your guys that maybe you're not quite as high on. And eventually what's probably going to end up happening, it'll land somewhere in the middle. And, there are some really good guys out there that I think are hireable, and guys that would want to come to a job that really, is not a terrible football job. One of the things that they were talking about, and that the fans here will hear in just a minute when Josh Parcell steps on, is there an appetite to win at Carolina when it comes to football? Or is, Carolina under this perceived notion that, basketball is all that anybody cares about? Is that the truth, or do you think that there's an appetite to win?
It's really hard to say. It's something that it's hard to in definitive statements. But I don't think that it's impossible to have a school or an athletic department that is dedicated to both. We've certainly seen that over the years with schools like Oklahoma, Michigan State, UCLA, places like that, maybe that aren't at the powerhouse level, maybe in one or the other at this point, but certainly that are dedicated to investing in their athletic programs. And I think you've even seen that in state. You've seen, maybe not to the level of, an ACC contender, but they've certainly raised the bar in terms of what they do on the football field. And as of right now, as much as it pains me to say it, you can see it with NC State that's raising their bar in terms of what they're doing on the football field. To an extent, Wake Forest has done this as well. So schools that are traditionally basketball schools, if we want to put that moniker on them, are raising their level of play, are investing in their football programs. And it's really, it shouldn't be kind of an excuse or an expectation that UNC should not invest in that purely because they have another successful sports sort of team or sports program on campus. That being said, I think that after the Larry Fedora era, there needs to be some sort of culture change, not only with the football team, just in general, that comes with the coaching change, but perhaps within the football program as a whole in terms of how it invests in the team and the effort it puts forward. Maybe I think there needs to be established more of an expectation, not formally, obviously, but just a general expectation amongst fans and amongst coaches and players about what it means to be part of Carolina football, because I feel like that's been a little vague for a while. I feel like through success or failure.
Oh, still there? Oh, I think we lost him. Yeah, so guys, as you heard, the connection going in and out there, we're going to try to get him back on. But, really what I think, he was talking about really was just, the fact that, it's kind of on the fans to, buy in and sort of, try to help these guys out. And right now, I mean, it definitely is, I feel like a little bit tough with the fan base. So yeah, Zach, sorry about that, man. Don't know quite what was going on there, but I think we've got it reset here for you.
All right, good. As what I was saying, the main issue as of right now is not that I am unsure of whether UNC has, a winning culture or is, sort of content to see where the chips may fall. I really think that it's unknown right now. It's really hard to tell. So I think that there has to be sort of it really starts with the coach, and if that's Larry Fedora, that's great, and if that's a new coach, that's great as well. There needs to be sort of an establishment of a standard of play and then of competition, maybe not in terms of X number of years, but there certainly needs to be more of a feeling of legitimate definition of what it means to be UNC football and what sort of that standard is.
I feel you, and I mean, part of it I think is on the fan base. Everybody, seems to want to, criticize and everything like that. And I mean, I've done a little bit of it myself, but you've got to show up on Saturdays and be there for these guys. I saw a lot of people saying they were going to give up their season tickets. And, even though I'm not going to be able to be there this year, I really wish I could be there more this season. But because of, other responsibilities that I've got for this year, during, college football Saturdays, unfortunately, most of the games I won't be able to make. But the thing is, man, everybody wants to, come out and really criticize. Mostly if you're criticizing the players, that's one of those areas where, look, I mean, these guys, to me, I don't think there's a ton of room for criticism. I think, in general, a lot of these guys have played hard, and I think that, really, one of the things that these fans have, they have a little bit of unrealistic expectations. I mean, there were people, I think, coming into this year, especially towards the end of the offseason, that were pretty much expecting this team to win 8 games, 9 games, and when they see that, it's to tailor the expectations. You can't be, expecting these guys to come off a 3-9 season and all of a sudden be back in contention for the ACC Coastal. But, at the same time, it's like you said, I think there needs to be some sort of an established, sort of, I guess a general, not requirement, but sort of an expectation mindset where, look, when you go in, we want, all we want is about 7 or 8 wins. I think that's kind of where everybody's at. Be in contention for that ACC Coastal, and I think that's where that's where a lot of people are satisfied at. As long as you're there, that's kind of where they want to be, and I think that's almost the direction that the athletic department is going. Now, the thing is, I mean, look, if you think that they don't care about football there, look, I can tell you one thing. Bubba Cunningham cares about football because Bubba Cunningham came from Notre Dame. So, football is in the blood in South Bend. It's just how it works. So, that's what happens when a guy like that comes. Of course, there's going to be a little more focus. We've seen it with the football facilities. So, look, they're putting some money into it. It's just, maybe now is the right time. You've got the money into the facilities. It seems like it's kind of reached that point with Larry. Maybe this is where you start fresh and sort of show the fan base that, look, we're starting fresh because we believe in this football program. And I don't think we're on, I saw people saying we're heading in the same direction as Kansas or Indiana, no, I don't think that's where we're at all. Most people probably don't realize this, but really before the Dean Smith era, football was what was big at Carolina. And even during the, during some of those early stretches with Dean Smith, in the 80s, football was still very, very popular among the Carolina fan base. It sort of faded here, once they got into the late Dean era and the, early Roy era. So, but at the same time, look, this school is a team. I mean, this program it's a good job. It's something that I feel like, at least from the fan base, there's an appetite to win. There's an appetite to, be in that ACC Coastal contention every year. So, yeah, I mean, if you're a coach out there on the free agent market, this is not a bad job, no matter what anybody tells you. There are passionate fans here. There are people that are invested in this program, and that's something that, to me, I think could end up landing them someone exciting, maybe like a Lane Kiffin. But with Lane Kiffin, you got to just kind of know that there's always a chance that he can leave at any time. So, we'll turn and look what was supposed to be today's game. Just a couple of really quick topics, or Saturday's game. What was supposed to be Saturday's game now being canceled. When you looked at it, Danny Cannell was one of the guys that was extremely critical of the games being canceled when they were on Tuesday. And Virginia Tech, I'm pretty sure you've seen some of the comments they've had about their game with East Carolina. When it comes to our game, did you think it was the right call at that time?
At the time, based on the information that we had, I certainly think that it was the right call. And on Saturday, it's going to get wet in Keene State, and it would not be a good day for a game. And at the time, there were concerns of safety. I mean, the campuses have basically evacuated. The people that have the ability to go home have. So it's not just that, everyone's there and they just canceled the game. There are serious efforts by numerous colleges in North Carolina and South Carolina to cancel their games and, just keep everyone safe. So I don't think that I really didn't agree with the criticism from Virginia Tech and from Danny Cannell. I mean, this is people's safety that we're talking about. It's more important, than football. There's chances that these games can be made up. It's not really a huge deal in comparison to people's, safety and people's lives. And then just from the sort of the Tar Heels perspective of this, UCF rather, is is a good team. They're a very good team led by a very good quarterback. Some would even say a Heisman level quarterback, Mackenzie Milton. So this was not a game, despite being at home against a Group of 5 team, that I was very confident in. And like you said earlier, it gives the Tar Heels another week to get some practice in, to take some room to breathe, to kind of reevaluate what they're doing, maybe to spark a flame under this season and get some motivation back, get some intensity, get some focus, and really just be more prepared for that Pitt game. So I think that the cancellation of this UCF game is an overall good for UNC. I don't think that it was going to be a particularly close game. I think that if UCF played a lot of Power 5 teams this year, they would have a very good chance of beating quite a few of them. This is not, though there are pieces missing, this is very much still a similar team to the team last year that went undefeated and beat Auburn in the Peach Bowl. So I don't think that UCF, despite being, in the American Athletic, as a team that should be overlooked, I think it helps out UNC's season a bunch. I think it's helpful overall.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the thing that really was kind of forgotten about from these college football analysts and really from Virginia Tech as well, when you look at why these games were canceled, and I listened to Larry Fedora live on Tuesday night, and Rick Steinbacher, I think, really just kind of put one of those, he put it out there and really just kind of showed people, look, this is why we did it. It's not because of the game. It's because these people coming from the coast need somewhere to go. Some of these people don't have family that live in other parts of the state, or they have family that lives on the West Coast. They're not going to go all the way out there. They need a place to go. And these hotels that were taken by, football fans that were coming into town, that's not the necessity. So there was a chance to free those rooms up and give people a place to stay in Chapel Hill, in the Raleigh area, in an area that was generally, supposed to be at least in a better situation than out on the coast. And by, that was kind of the main thing. They're focusing on people's safety. This is not the focus on, just we're worried about playing a football game. Sometimes there are things, believe it or not, that are more important than football. I mean, trust me, I love football. I think what Tennessee is doing is fantastic, where they're inviting fans that, are being displaced because of the storm to come free of charge to the game and, just come and watch Tennessee play. I mean, you can make all the jokes you want about it, but I think it's fantastic to have, somebody step up and say, look, we'll let you enjoy a day, and just come in and have some fun and kind of get your mind off of what is going on. I think everybody's rallied around it pretty well, but to see guys like Danny Cannell and the athletic director at Virginia Tech that were really fairly critical of the decisions to cancel these games, I think it was just irresponsible. And, both of those guys, I think need to take accountability for that. But ultimately, as we look at it now, it's probably not going to affect Chapel Hill as much as it was initially thought to affect Chapel Hill. But at the same time, look, I mean, even if we're focusing on, a football perspective, this is not the worst thing that this game was canceled. You mentioned it. UCF is a really, really good football team. Mackenzie Milton, yes, he is definitely a problem. That entire offense is really going to be an issue. I mean, that team really has not slowed down much from last year. Even with, Scott Frost moving on, Jay Hobson's come in and the transition has been really seamless. But, when I look at it, I think, in the rain, that's not really the type of environment that you want to play in if you're trying to get your offense going after it struggled for 2 weeks. Who knows? I mean, at least, we would have to run the football more, one would believe. But at the same time, yeah, it's ultimately about the safety of fans. And, one of the other things that Rick Steinbacher said that I think helped in making this decision is he talked a little bit about playing during Hurricane Matthew back in 2016. And it's like he said, sometimes you make a decision and it may be right, it may be wrong. You got to learn from it. I think they made that decision back in 2016 to play. And then after a while, they kind of saw, hey, this wasn't the right decision. And when we're faced with another decision like they were this week, we're going to make the call to just call it off and not worry about it. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they did what they did. But, I mean, it gives these guys a chance, everybody to kind of reset. I think this team still, from what I heard from Sam Doughton, and you guys will hear him in a moment, he's still pretty confident. A lot of these guys are still, nobody's really bailing on this season. Nobody's pointing fingers. So far, everything's kind of remained intact. Yeah, I mean, it's been there have been 2 tough losses. But at the same time, these guys feel like, look, there's still a little bit of hunger from last year. And once they get that first win, potentially they could get something rolling. So, who knows? Maybe Pittsburgh's that game that gets it started. Then you got Miami just 5 days later. So, it could be, helpful that game is 5 days later, because who knows? If you come out of that game with a win against Pittsburgh, you could roll over that momentum and keep it going just 5 days later against Miami. So, I think right now the cancellation, yeah, it's disappointing, but at the same time, it definitely helps this team. So, last question, and then we'll get you we'll get you out of here and get rolling towards hopefully what will be the September 22nd game against Pittsburgh, barring anything major. What are you going to do with your Saturday now that Carolina is not going to be on television?
Well, I'll probably try to watch some other games. I'll probably try to maybe catch the Pitt and Georgia Tech playing this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're playing around noon or 12:30, so probably look through that. try to see if I can sort of scout out either team for future games. Obviously, Pitt's coming up soon, but Georgia Tech will be a game down the line. And then besides that, really just try to stay out of the rain, out of the wind, stay safe. Look at things. Try to get prepared for the Pitt game coming up the week after.
Sounds like a plan. That's my plan. No Carolina football, so just a heavier dose of college football to get me through. But I will definitely. That Pitt Georgia Tech game is going to be one that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. And if Georgia Tech can get that win, I think that would help us out a little bit. Going into that game against Pittsburgh. So man, thanks for joining us. Definitely stay safe. We'll hopefully talk to you again next week. We'll try to do it around Wednesday a little bit earlier. So just stay safe and just call me whenever you get a chance next week, man, and we'll get this thing on, right?
All right, sounds good.
All right, man.
Yeah, what's up, man?
Yeah, how's it going? It's Anthony. Man, hey, I really want to thank you for stepping on. I guess I'll start giving you a little bit of background. And for anybody that doesn't know, Josh Parcell, the host of Middays here on WFNZ in Charlotte. So, a guy that knows a ton about college football. And I wanted to start by asking you, when it comes to the Tar Heels, I know you were watching or at least keeping an eye on the game against East Carolina. We entered as a 16.5-point favorite. What was your reaction when you saw that we ended up not only losing, but getting beat by 22 on the road to a team that lost to an FCS opponent the week before?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was a sign that Larry Fedora is clearly losing control of the program. And East Carolina is one of the worst teams. I mean, you just said it yourself, Anthony, with that loss to NCAA the week before. I mean, this is one of the worst teams in all of FBS. And for North Carolina to lose, and not just lose, but to lose embarrassingly, is it's a sign that Larry Fedora is losing control at North Carolina. And he had the program rolling for quite a while. He did a fantastic job for the first several years that he was there. Obviously got them to an ACC championship, but one thing's led to another, which I'm sure we'll get into over the course of the podcast, but it's just slowly started to unravel. And at this point, I don't think you can really look at what the program is right now and say that Fedora is in control. I think it might be time for them to move on sooner rather than later.
One of the things that I've seen a lot of people trying to say with these first few games is that the suspensions to start the season were really what has affected them. I want you to tell the rest of these fans what I've been trying to tell them, which is the fact that the suspensions, they have a little bit of an effect, but there really aren't that many starters that have been removed from the lineup, and there's not enough, in my opinion, to at least justify saying that we shouldn't have beaten East Carolina. Am I right to have that perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when the story came out in early August that 13 players were going to be suspended, it sounded a lot worse than it really was. I mean, you lose your starting defensive ends, but you stagger those suspensions regardless. You lose Chad Surratt, who maybe he would have started, maybe not. We don't really know. It really didn't have that much of an impact. I mean, outside of that, a little bit of depth here and there, but not enough that should lead to UNC losing to East Carolina. There should still be enough talent on that team to get by one of the worst teams in the American Athletic Conference, period. And this is not an excuse. It should not be something that UNC and Larry Fedora can point to and say, this is why we lost. Last year, losing as many guys as they did to injury, you can point to that and you can use that as an excuse. You can use that as a reason why Carolina suffered the way they did. This is a totally different ballgame, and it's by no means a reason for Larry Fedora to be off the hook. It's squarely on him to win these games.
Now, you've said that pretty much it seems like Fedora is, I guess, am I right in saying that you think he's all but gone at the end of the season?
I mean, it seems like it. There's, I guess, a way you could make a case that he stays on. One of those ways would be if Carolina somehow rebounds and goes 6-6 this season, which would mean they upset probably Miami and Virginia Tech. They would win some big games down the stretch. I don't think anybody can look at the team that they put out on the field in the first 2 weeks and think that's really possible. But the other question would just be if Carolina decides they don't want to buy him out. I mean, $14 million is a lot of money for a school that puts football rather on the back burner because of the basketball program. I think at the end of the day, Carolina's going to pay up that money. I mean, they while it's not Alabama, while it's not Miami, and the standard isn't national titles for football, they still want to be competitive and they want to be relevant. And if they fall this far in 2 years, counting last season as well, I think that they'll find the money, they'll find the cash to buy him out and move on to a new coach who will give a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it happening. The fact that he's 4-14 in his last 18 games, 2-14 against his last 16 FBS opponents. I mean, it's not looking that good for Larry right now, and especially with how he's performing on the recruiting trail, it makes sense. One of the questions that I think a lot of people have at the moment is, right now it's reached a point where there's a lot of frustration. Would they move on from Larry Fedora in season? And especially, I think what most people are wondering is, would they risk moving on from him right now? Maybe firing him here in this window that we're going to have now that the Central Florida game has been canceled.
Yeah, well, that obviously makes a big difference. A lot of times you'll see those moves made during a bye week, and now it turns out that's what UNC has. Fedora's not going to lose his job before they play their next game next Saturday, but when you start looking at schools that want to make a move in season, you have to think about the ramifications of that. And recruiting is really what I'm talking about. If you make a move now, do you risk losing a lot of the guys who you have committed so far? LSU did this a couple years ago, and they moved on from Les Miles and hired an interim coach. USC got rid of Sarkisian and moved on to Clay Helton and had success with him. And you've seen some teams that salvage their season, but you take a hit on the recruiting trail. And for North Carolina, I think it's important for them. I would let Larry Fedora play out the season. They may lose a couple recruits regardless because they'll see the writing on the wall. But I think it's much easier for a school to replace a guy. Maybe they fire Larry Fedora in late November and then hire his replacement a week later. I think it's easier to try to keep most of your recruiting class intact than it is to basically cut bait with him in September, October, and then it's open season on your recruiting class for the next 2 months until you name a permanent coach. So I would actually tend to believe they'll keep him through the rest of the year, no matter how bad it gets, and then just hopefully move quickly when the time comes in late November after their season's over.
Put yourself in Bubba Cunningham's shoes when that day comes. Who is the first guy that you are calling?
So, I think they could probably shoot for the moon and try to hire an already established coach in a Power 5 conference. I don't know who that would be, but I don't know that anybody who has a pretty good job right now at a Power 5 school is going to leave for UNC. So realistically, Scott Satterfield is the number one guy. He's the obvious candidate. I mean, he has the ties to North Carolina. He's had success in the state already at Appalachian State. I would give him a call. He's won a lot of games there for the Mountaineers, most notably coming so close to beating Penn State just a few weeks ago and then almost beating Tennessee in Knoxville 2 years ago. He has the chops. He's ready for a big-time job. The other guys that I would look at, Seth Luttrell at North Texas is somebody who is not on a lot of people's radars yet, but has slowly taken North Texas from an absolute train wreck into a pretty good program. North Texas has won more games every year that he has been there, and he was the OC on the UNC team that played for an ACC title in 2015. So he was a part of the program. He's been around, and while he is a Larry Fedora disciple, and maybe that's something you don't necessarily want to align yourself with when you're changing directions. I mean, Luttrell was obviously a reason why Carolina was successful back then, and he's done nothing to prove anybody otherwise that he wouldn't succeed as a head coach. He's done it at North Texas. So those are two names that I like. If you're thinking about other guys, Greg Schiano, I think would be a really good fit if they want to go the defensive route. Tony Elliott has had a lot of success at Clemson. He's probably ready for a head job. I don't think he'd be their first call, but those are the guys that I look at as probably the first few names you would hear about. And if they don't get one of those guys, then it's really up in the air where they could turn. I don't know who I predict in that case.
Yeah, Luttrell, I mean, here's one of the interesting stats. At this moment, he's actually out-recruiting Fedora in the 2019 class. They have the 56th ranked class in the country, Carolina at 58.
Wow.
So, yeah, how about that? Getting beat. I know, people will say, well, look at Nick Saban. You're supposed to have your guys maybe out-recruiting you. It's like, well, that's a Power 5 job, though, in the SEC at Georgia, not a guy that's coaching in the Conference USA. So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's a couple of names that I know fans have thrown out there, and I would venture to say these guys are not coming there, which are right now Brent Venables, I know, is one that I've kind of ruled out, and Bob Stoops, which I know he's not coming there. But both of those guys, would you give them a call and just kind of gauge to see where they're at? I mean, Venables, I think, is a little bit tougher because of his son playing at Clemson at the moment.
Yeah. Bob Stoops is a pipe dream. Not going to happen. If Bob Stoops ever comes back to the sideline, it's going to be to coach at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that might be the only job that he comes out of retirement for. But if it is, it's for a blue blood job. I mean, the guy won a national title at Oklahoma. He's very happy in retirement. He's not coming to North Carolina unless they absolutely throw a boatload of money at him. And they don't have that kind of money because they're going to be paying it to Larry Fedora. So their best hope is to hire one of those up-and-coming coaches, either from a Group of 5 school or a hot assistant. Brent Venables, he's never struck me as a guy who would be a great head coach. It's very rare that you see a coordinator who is as emotionally off the hinges on the sideline, defensive coordinator who fits in as a head coach. Typically, you want your head coach to be a guy who's a little bit more in control, a little bit more presidential, if you will. I mean, I think about a guy, granted, he's doing a little bit better in his second tenure as a head coach, but Will Muschamp was the same way. Will Muschamp at Texas, and before that at Alabama, he was a guy who was fiery on the sideline. He was an up-and-coming coach. He was actually the coach in waiting at Texas before leaving that to go to Florida. And that whole stick didn't really play as a head coach. And he's doing a little bit better at South Carolina. He's maintained his temper a little bit more. I think he learned from that first stint. Venables has been around for a long time. He's comfortable as a coordinator. He's highly paid as a coordinator, which is another thing. He doesn't really have a big reason to leave. UNC is a great job. I think Venables is comfortable being a defensive coordinator, not dislike Bud Foster at Virginia Tech, who's just a lifelong defensive coordinator, had probably chances to be a head coach, never found the right opportunity. I don't know that they ever would have been a great fit as a head coach. That's how I see Venables. I don't know that that's the route I would take if I'm UNC. I've just never been sold on him as a heck of a defensive coordinator, but it's two different roles, and I think Venables is perfectly suited for the role that he's in right now.
Yeah, you are definitely right that he is off the hinges. When you have a guy that is literally assigned to the staff to hold your defensive coordinator off the field, having him as a head coach might be a bit of an issue. One of the other things that's really interesting, I think, just in general about this upcoming coaching roundtable is that, when you look at who some of the guys are that don't have jobs right now, there are names like Les Miles. Tar Heel fans are really starting to get back on the train that Mac Brown may want to end up coming back to college football and coaching. Or Hugh Freeze. Would you see any of those three options as being guys that could end up in that job come next season?
I would not touch a single one of those guys. I just wouldn't. I think if you're Carolina, roll the dice on a younger coach who's full of energy. I mean, think about the coaches that are getting hired today in college football. It's Tom Herman. It's PJ Fleck. It's young, energetic coaches. Willie Taggart at Florida State, guys that bring an attitude and an energy to a program that recruits can relate to. Okay, the era of the kind of curmudgeonly, old school, traditional coach, fewer and further between these days. And Mac Brown did a great job for a long time. Outside of the Vince Young era at Texas, once Vince Young left, they underwhelmed. Well, I should say Colt McCoy. I'm sorry. After the Colt McCoy era, they underwhelmed and underperformed every year after that. He failed to recruit a quarterback. They never lived up to their talent. Les Miles was the same way. Couldn't recruit the quarterback position. Those two guys are almost parallel universe of one another. I wouldn't go after either one of those guys. The game of college football has passed them by. Now, the other name that you said, Hugh Freeze, for a school that just spent almost a decade under the cloud of the NCAA, probably not the best idea to go after a coach who was fired for calling prostitutes or whatever it was at Ole Miss. I would steer clear of Hugh Freeze. I think Hugh Freeze's best bet is going to be to return maybe at the NFL level as an offensive assistant guy. I don't know that he'll ever be a head coach in college football again. Certainly not at a Power 5 job first. If Hugh Freeze is going to ever coach in a Power 5 school, he's going to have to do what Bobby Petrino did, which is go to Western Kentucky or somewhere like that, win at a high level. Lane Kiffin is doing the same thing right now at Florida Atlantic. That's the route you take. It's not often or really ever that you see somebody leave under the same sort of scandal that Hugh Freeze did under Ole Miss and get another cushy Power 5 job without having to pay his dues first.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, I kind of agree. For sure. I think you're right. When you look at just now, we talked about the names. Let's turn to the job just in general. And you asked this question last week, before we got to, during the Cal game. Where do you see this job ranking wise in terms of college football? Is this a good job, or is this a job that most people will look at and say, their fan base really just doesn't care all that much about this job, which I think is partially true, but I think there is passion here.
Yeah, I think it is a good job. The question I asked was, is it a great job, is it a good job, or is it a bad one? Because there's a difference between a good job and a great one, and most people voted it's a good job. I would agree with that. There is an appetite for winning. They have resources. They have a name brand recognition of being UNC. They're in a fertile recruiting territory, and there's opportunities to win. I actually think that the perceived lack of fan support kind of can be a good thing in a way because it lowers expectations. So at Carolina, all they want to do is win 8 games a year, maybe win 9, 10, or 11 once every 4 or 5 years, make a run, finish in the top 15 if you can, maybe make an ACC championship game every so often, beat Duke, beat State, and have bragging rights over those schools for a year. I think that if you can do that, they're really going to be happy. They're going to be satisfied. There's not a lot of schools, I think, where you can say winning 8 games every year is going to be enough over time. I think as long as you do that at Carolina, you're going to be secure, and a lot of these coaches want job security. I mean, you think about a couple of years ago in the ACC, look at some of the coaches that they've hired in the conference. You mean, you talk about Justin Fuente at Virginia Tech, Mark Richt went to Miami, Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, even Dave Doran at NC State. You're seeing a lot of the big-name coaches, or I shouldn't say big-name, but hot young coaches or rising coaches, hot commodities, they're coming to the ACC because it's easier to win, and the pressure and the expectations are lower than they are at SEC schools. What happened to the SEC is the pressure and the money got so astronomical and so out of proportion that expectations are so high. At Carolina, you go 8-4, you're going to be good. If at Mississippi State you're going 8-4, or at Tennessee you're going 8-4, after a while that's going to get old. I don't think that would ever get old at Carolina. I think it is a good job. You clearly see a fan base that's revolting against a coach already. If this job was a bad job, I think Wake Forest is a bad job. Dave Clawson's doing a good job there, but all in all, that is a bad job. If Wake Forest goes 3-9 and then starts the next year 0-2, Wake Forest probably isn't putting its coach on the hot seat. But at UNC, he is. I think that alone signals that there is an appetite to win. Maybe not to the level of Clemson, maybe not to the level of Virginia Tech or Florida State, but there is an appetite for winning, and I think that in itself makes this an attractive job, especially for a young coach who wants to use this as a stepping stone to maybe take a blue blood job down the line.
Do you think that the area of recruiting around here, which has just blown up over the last few years, do you think that has a bit of an impact on how people see the job?
100%. 100%. I mean, the North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in terms of population in the country. And you're already seeing that sort of be reflected in the recruiting. And Justin Fuente, Virginia Tech, came in 2 years ago and made an immediate priority to recruit the state of North Carolina because he knew, first of all, Virginia Tech campus is actually closer to Charlotte and some of the hotbeds in North Carolina than it is to Washington, D.C. or to the Tidewater. North Carolina, to actually flip that on its head, UNC in Chapel Hill is closer to the 757 than Virginia Tech. So you're in an area where you are very close to a ton of talent. You're 2.5 hours from Charlotte. Mm-hmm. You're 2 hours from the East Coast to Tidal Basin. I mean, there are so many Division I prospects, 4- and 5-star players, pretty much in your backyard. You should be able to recruit at a very high level at UNC. I think that has a huge impact on how good this job can be. And the next coach who comes in, if Larry Fedora ends up moving on after this season, whoever takes that job has to try to reclaim that area, that radius around Chapel Hill before Dave Doran and, more importantly, Dabo Swinney and Justin Fuente really just wreak havoc on the state.
Yeah, so we'll get out of this and we'll ask one last question. You know, at FNZ, there are...
I don't know the whole history there, but as somebody who takes his fair share of heat for saying critical things of the Panthers on a daily basis, I can see where fans will turn on a radio host quickly. Kyle has no problem with UNC, though. I think Kyle does see Carolina as a good job. I actually think it's more attractive than Kyle does. We're going to actually take a podcast later this week where we're going to get into that. So Kyle and I are going to do on College Football Country podcast. We're going to talk about the attractiveness of the Carolina job and debate it. And I'm curious to hear his thoughts as we get a little more in depth on it. But no, Kyle has no problem with UNC as far as I know. Nobody has any naked pictures of Kyle from on the Chapel Hill campus. So I think he's good there. But no, I love Kyle, and he does a good job at FNZ, even if he might irritate a few fans over in the Triangle sometimes.
Well, thank you for putting that image on our head. That's going to take a while to get out, but yeah, thanks for stepping on though with us and talking about the job and everything. And yeah, we'll definitely be listening, especially in the Charlotte area. You're great at what you do, man. Just keep doing it. Don't worry about these fans that are telling you otherwise. They don't, understand just how hard this job is and how much hours we put into this job. And I mean, look, you're entitled to your own opinion, and I like that you're not afraid to bring it, anytime that you're on the air. So thank you again for stepping on with us.
Appreciate it, Anthony. Anytime.
Hey, man. Yeah, you take care. All right, so Josh Parcell of WFNZ stopping on to talk. I think the last question may have got cut off a little bit, but we heard a little bit there. I was just asking him about the co-host, Kyle Bailey, who does the afternoon show on WFNZ here in Charlotte. He does Garcia and Bailey. And there's nothing personal, just, seen that Kyle Bailey has been going head-to-head a little bit with some of the fans in the fan base, and just his comment that he had on Josh Parcell's a tweet. So, I was just kind of wondering, but in all seriousness, class act, those guys down there at WFNZ, they do a great job, and it was great to have Josh Parcell on to talk and get a little bit of a different opinion. Josh is a guy that has been in and around college football for a long, long time now, so glad I could have him on to give you guys that perspective. With the game being canceled this week, what we are going to do, I believe we're still going to try to have a podcast at some point this week. I don't know if we're going to do it on Wednesday or if we're going to do it on Thursday, but we are going to have a podcast at some point this week where me and Zach will come on and talk about what is going on currently with the Tar Heel football program. We will not be able to preview this week's game as it has officially been canceled. If you missed that, they are canceling the game for this weekend. The game as of right now has not been rescheduled. Both sides were apparently working on trying to get the game rescheduled, but at this point, with different bye weeks, it more than likely seems that neither team will be able to make it work. And unfortunately, that game will not be able to be played this year. The Tar Heels will have a bye, and at this point, it seems like the Tar Heels will have 2 byes this season. And this bye week could end up being huge for health reasons for this Tar Heel football team. Because as you guys know, guys that missed this past week included Michael Carter, Aaron Crawford, who we knew about, Brandon Fritz, of course, who we knew about as well, but also guys like Miles Dorn and J.J. McCargo. Having a week off could definitely help those guys to be able to get back on the field for a crucial game against Pitt. Guys, later on here today, Sam Doughton of the Argyle Report is going to step on with us, and we will chat about the game being canceled on Saturday and about a few other things, including the Larry Fedora situation as he sees it right now. But for now, we'll step off on the Heel Tough blog podcast. I want to thank you guys for listening. As always, subscribe to the podcast on Spreaker, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the TuneIn app, iHeartRadio, and many other places. Follow the blog on Medium.com. Just search Heel Tough Blog. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, go Tar Heels. On Sam Doughton of the Argyle Report. Sam, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Anthony, how you doing?
Good, man. So, yeah, I guess you're battening down the hatches and getting ready for Hurricane Florence, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. Chapel Hill's pretty quiet right now. I'm sitting on campus now. Officially, campus is under reduced operations at this point. Obviously, the sun's still out. The hurricane's a couple days away from making landfall here. And I saw one track where it's not even going to come here now, but there's another track where it comes right towards us. So we really don't know. I'm riding it out here in Chapel Hill. So we'll see what happens. But, not a whole lot for Tar Heel Athletics. They've canceled or postponed everything this week.
Right.
So, I think that's the right decision because this doesn't look good. It's not. I don't think it's going to be a good storm for anyone. There's going to be a lot of damage to it. Maybe not necessarily here, but in the eastern part of the state. That's something you got to be mindful of.
Right. So, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. I want to start by asking you about last week and, what you saw. Just start by telling me what your takeaways were from Saturday's game.
I mean, my takeaways was UNC just was never on the same page with one another. They never, got themselves ready to play. It seemed like, it started out okay. The offense, went really well. Antonio Williams was doing some really great things running the football, and other folks were doing good stuff. But, it's just the second half they came out flat, and, you felt like they kept getting field goals in that first half.
Right.
And when they should have gotten touchdowns, and the second half was frustrating to watch. And I think it was frustrating for everyone to watch, and sort of leaving everybody with a lot of questions about where this program can go from here, and if there's a place for this program to go. And, of course, there's 10 games left, or I guess 9 games left now. Plenty of time for them to, get some wins on the table. But it's hard to have any confidence they're going to beat anybody after that game, except for maybe Western. Yeah.
How big do you think the ejection of Antonio Williams was in that game?
I mean, it was big because obviously he was their feature back and he was, doing a good job. But I think they should have trusted Jordan and Javante behind him a little more in the second half. They really went away from the run game.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like Jordan and Javante were playing bad. Like they were, they just didn't get a chance to show what they can do. And of course, Jordan's a little bit different in the back than Antonio. You're not going to run Jordan between the tackles as much. But they were having a lot of success blocking on the run throughout the game. And then second half, it seemed like they hardly did it at all.
Yeah.
And they were running a lot of bubble screens and other things. And have a class of Thomas Jackson. There was one play where he just got gobbled up because it was just the wrong play call. There was 2 guys on their side of the field, and there's one person to block, and that's a numbers game. They're going to tackle him behind the line of scrimmage, and that's tough. And so if they kept running the ball, I think they would have stayed in the game more. But I think maybe they got a little bit behind. I think East Carolina got the kickoff and scored. So they were down 9 points to start the half when the offense got the ball back, and at that point they changed their game plan and tried to score a little more quickly, and it collapsed. Didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I thought the run game worked well throughout all of the first half. And, even when Jordan Brown was in there, I thought they were very effective, especially running to the right side. But, Yeah, I mean that's something that we could sit there and question in many games throughout the Larry Fedora era. But yeah, I mean especially right now, it just keeps seeming like it's a question of why are we throwing the football so much when this passing game is really struggling, especially when it seems like every play call in the book is really designed to try to get the ball at least 15 to 20 yards downfield. I mean, am I the only one that's maybe frustrated with the fact that they, in some of these 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 type situations, there's no routes that are trying to pick up first downs by, getting to the sticks, maybe running a 10-yard in or something like that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you bring up a good point. There were a lot of situations where they were running, if they're out Williams deep, or they were crossing somebody across the middle of the field and trying to deep route and throwing it into triple coverage. And in particular, it's frustrating because Nathan Elliott was having trouble with his accuracy during the game, particularly on the deep ball. He was underthrowing a lot of those passes where he had people that could have been open, and they were broken up because the ball was short. So, when you have a quarterback that might be struggling with his footwork a little bit and he's not quite as accurate, you can throw some shorter routes to give him a little more confidence or, make the footwork less of a big deal, to get exactly right. There's more of a window for error. There's less room for the ball to travel to get where they're going. But I mean, I think like if you look at Fedora's play calling throughout the years, he's always had it's always been a lot of vertical passing concepts, and a lot of the wide receivers he has on the outside are speed guys that's what they do best. De'Ami Brown, that's very much what he's known for. He's not a tremendous route runner at this point. He's known for his speed and getting downfield and other things like that. But then you still got guys like Thomas Jackson that that's ostensibly what they're good at is cutting in and getting those short routes. So I don't know. I do think ECU had good coverage all day on the wide receivers. There wasn't really any moment where anybody got the breaks. Maybe they didn't have confidence in their ability to run a great route and get open on those in that short amount of time. That would be my best guess of the situation at this moment. And so they'd rather take their chances using their speed, which I think they correctly decided they had more speed than ECU did on the outside, and try to do that, and they just couldn't get a deep ball to work because if Nathan can throw it far enough. So I mean it's sort of they're in different spots. The wide receivers are really athletic, but they're young and maybe don't have the technical skills quite there yet that they had when Mack and Bug and Switzer were all here at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Nathan struggled throwing the ball deep. He really seemed to struggle with his footwork again on Saturday. At this point, we got a little glimpse of what we're going to see possibly from Cade Fortin when he ends up taking over that job potentially down the line. Do you think that there is any chance that at some point this season they could go to Cade Fortin even when Chaz Surratt returns? Because, from what I saw from him, he's probably got the best deep ball on the team.
Oh, 100%. Cade's definitely probably got the best arm talent of anybody on the roster right now. But the question of whether they're going to go to him in any situation, I highly doubt we're going to see him for any prolonged series of time unless Nathan Elliott happens to get hurt these next 2 games. Because I think Nathan, obviously, you never know if Larry Fedora always likes to make the quarterbacks compete and can never decide on one when he has 2. So when Chaz is back, ostensibly I think a lot of people would like to see Chaz get a chance to start, given how poorly Nathan's played these first couple games. Obviously, Nathan can change that in the next couple games as well. He plays great against Pitt and great against. Who's that? UVA, I guess they play next. After that,
Miami on the Thursday night.
Yeah, Miami on Thursday night. That's right. So if he plays good, he plays well in both those games. He played really well against Miami last year. He can cement himself in that spot, but obviously he has inspired a lot of confidence so far. I don't know. I think Chaz brings a lot to the table as far as running the football that Cade doesn't necessarily bring, even though Cade has the better arm count at this point. So it's a tough decision, but I understand like the true freshman thing, and if he doesn't play in 4 games, you can pop that red shirt on, still have 4 years of eligibility left, which is I think would be a great thing for Cade to do because he sort of roadblock a little bit. Chaz is a redshirt sophomore and is probably going to be their parent if Nathan doesn't stay the starter next year as a senior. So it'd be nice for him to keep a year of eligibility. I don't know if necessarily he's the best option right now. Like I said, I think there's a lot of things on offense they need to fix. It's not just Nathan Elliott's playing poorly right now, and he hasn't played that well. I mean, he's done some good things, I think. I think he's shown good leadership abilities. He's saying all the right things. The team seems to respect him a lot. And I do think he's been let out to dry by a couple of situations. His offensive line protected him better this weekend, but, he's still getting hurried a whole lot, and that doesn't help. And like I mentioned earlier, the wide receivers aren't getting out their breaks quite as well as maybe they could. So I think they're going to roll with Nathan for now. They're going to stick with the experience. Coach Fedora's offense isn't something that's very easy for a true freshman to learn. So, we'll just see it by ear. I wouldn't mind seeing Katie come out and play some more, but I don't think it's necessarily something anyone should expect.
You talked about it a little bit earlier. At this point, where do you think that Larry Fedora's job security is?
If he wasn't owed $14 million at the end of the year, based on his buyout, I think he'd be gone already. Maybe not, because Bubba Cunningham, his personality doesn't strike me as somebody to fire somebody in the middle of the year. But the fan base is enraged at this point. And that probably doesn't do anybody any good to fire somebody second game of the season either. He's still got time to turn it around, but he has the hottest seat in the country right now, and I don't even think it's close. At this point, it's surely not close in the Power 5 as to who has the hottest seat in the country. This is a program that expects decent results. They don't expect to be a national title contender necessarily, but 7 wins, 8 wins a year, not outside the realm of possibility for the school. And he's not shown a ton of confidence. He's 4 for 14 in his last 18 games. Then you go to the record against the in-state Power 5, not even Power 5, the in-state FBS teams. He's 1-3 against, or he's 7-11 against them. 1-3 against ECU, 3-3 against State, 2-4 against Duke, and 1-1 against Wake. And he's got games against App State coming, and UNC's playing games against App State in the future. And App State's been one of the best non-Power 5, one of the best group of 5 schools in the country for football recently. So it just, he doesn't have a whole heck of a lot going for him right now. And I said this, at the beginning of the season, the good news is that he has time to fix it and time to correct it. But he certainly hasn't inspired confidence based on the adjustments they made game from Cal to ECU of being able to, with the current staff he has assembled, do that.
Yeah, I have to agree. Inside Carolina's Taylor Vipolis, I think, said it best. This team right now, with where they're sitting at, is probably lucky to equal last year's 3-win total. So, it's not good. We hope, of course, that can turn around, but it's not going to be easy. And right now, with what we're seeing from really the coaching staff, I think that's where most people are frustrated. I don't think it's really that as much with the kids, because I feel like they think the talent is there. It's just the situations that the coaching staff is putting them in, and mostly I think the play calling is what people are really frustrated with. But we'll move past that and focus on this weekend. We talked about it right when you got on about the Hurricane canceling. I think it was the right move, and I can basically take away that you think it was the right move too. I don't know if you saw this, but Danny Cannell says that he thought the school should have waited and they acted too quickly to cancel these games. Am I the only one out there that thinks that this guy is just crazy?
I did see that tweet, and when I first saw it, I definitely had the same reaction you did, that that's insane. Why are they doing this? And I still think he shouldn't have tweeted that. But I get where he's coming from, because like I said, I saw a track of the storm today where it basically spirals around the North Carolina-South Carolina border for a bit and then goes down the South Carolina coast and turns in towards Atlanta. And so if it does that, we're not going to get anything here. But, you sit here like, oh, my God, UNC canceled this game, and so did State, and they could have played, and they're losing all this revenue, and how unfair it is for West Virginia that they might not make the playoff because they don't have 12 games or whatever. And then, that's going to be the talking point if that happens. But the fact of the matter is that if by canceling the games now, fans can cancel the hotel room reservations that they've made now, which frees up the hotel rooms for the people in the eastern part of the state that need to evacuate their areas to go somewhere away from, where the storm's really going to do the most damage. They can't wait out 140-mile-an-hour winds and their homes on the coast, or even 80-mile-an-hour winds. They got to get somewhere there. So by removing the hotel rooms in Raleigh and Chapel Hill and Durham and everywhere else in between that people were staying in, those free up for other people to come to. And also it frees up first responders to go places and be able to stay there and be able to get to places to go help. So it's there's a lot of factors at play here. And I think that both UNC and NC State, by canceling the games this weekend, are being very responsible citizens of the community for the state and, making the right decision. Also, it pulls away emergency resources because, there's a lot of emergency requirements you got to have to run a game, as far as, having ambulance staff there, and, EMTs and all this other stuff, and, event personnel, and sometimes event personnel can also have other jobs that might be helpful and other things. Like my roommate's going down to a hospital in Goldsboro to go help out, and he's part of some sort of emergency response deployment unit with the state. And, some people who work event staff might do that. So it's just like there's a lot of people who are freed up by the games not happening to be able to help should, what's expected to happen and have this catastrophic hurricane come through and play. And there's just more important things to go on in the state. And, even if, the teams could have played this weekend, which, might happen. And maybe the hurricane does do that spiral thing. And it's, perfectly sunny 75, 80 here in Chapel Hill come noon on Saturday. Well, it's still like that part of the coast in North Carolina is going to be devastated by that hurricane at that point, and there's going to need to have emergency people down there, and maybe some people from the Triangle can come down and help.
Right.
So
yeah. You're right.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's the right decision. I think Danny Cannell needs to look outside his own heart for a second and think about, the logistics of it. And maybe that's not something he has to think about too much, both as a former player and, media member. I don't think about event logistics that often for what happened, but I think, as I saw it pointed out by other people today online, it made a whole lot of sense to me. And that's where I'm sort of like, just think about it for a couple seconds, Danny. And you'll quickly determine that that's not the right take to have in this situation.
Exactly. We all love college football, but yeah, I mean, let's be real here. There are things that are a little bit more important right now that are going on, getting prepared for this. So with the cancellation, the big question I think has to be for Tar Heel fans, what happens now on the suspension front, especially the one that I see a lot of people talking about is Malik Carney's suspension.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've read so far, what I've seen, is that the game doesn't count for suspension, obviously. So everyone's suspension gets moved back a week. But I think Malik was scheduled to skip this game coming up anyway, if I'm remembering correctly. He was scheduled to play against UCF and then sit out the next 3 or something because of the way they staggered it. Or maybe Tillman was supposed to play this and they're staggering him later or something. So you're seeing the potential of maybe one of those two. I don't have the list up right in front of me at this moment. Let me try to pull it up real quick. But you have these potential of somebody coming back that they're not expecting necessarily. Like we saw this past weekend, Brian Anderson was given a waiver to play in the case of injury because JJ McCargo is down.
Right.
In there, and they actually ended up not playing, so it's still counted for suspension. So he only has 2 games left, which is good. But yeah, no, I mean, so expect everyone to move back a game. Let me pull up the list and see where people are staggered right now. Let me see if I can find it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is it's going to be a little bit of a concern, just the depth guys getting moved back because, that's going to be a 5-day turnaround. That was kind of where everybody was like, okay, well, we've got the suspensions for the first 4 games, but at least we're going to have those depth guys back and ready to go for that Miami game. So the starters that have to turn around and play 5 days after playing will have those guys right behind them. Now that luxury is gone. So, that ends up hurting pretty badly, I think. I'm not sure, just how much that impacts really the final result of that game, because I think Miami at this point we can all agree is probably the better team. But yeah, at this point it's just one of those questions that I think still has to be answered. So,
The good news is I think there's a couple more depth players coming back. Greg Ross and Trey Shaw both missed both their games, so they're back.
Right.
So, defensive backs are fixed. Obviously, that the lineman play, you really want to get people back for. Bo Corrales is a big wideout that can do some of the things that maybe the wideouts currently on the field can't outside of Anthony Williams, as far as going vertical and getting up there and also being a pretty decent route runner and being able to block on some sweeps outside on the runs and other things like that just because of his size. So definitely a big deal. But yeah, no, I'd expect, keep your eyes out on that one, because I suspect there'll probably be a couple more NCAA appeals. That 5-day turnaround's a big one you thought of, and the NCAA's been pretty lenient with all these, so long as enough people miss the games that they need to miss for this. And so I think you might see a situation where they go to the 5-day, where it's like with the 5-day turnaround, they say, hey, we need 5 of our 9 guys available because it's we're short, and particularly if more people keep getting hurt. which was one benefit, I guess, of the CCF week is everybody has time to heal up. Michael Carter gets, a free week.
Right.
Aaron Crawford gets a free week. JJ McCarthy gets a free week. Everybody, all the players that were out that maybe helped contribute to why the ECU loss looked so bad. You can never tell. Obviously, a couple botched snaps against ECU completely killed drives. And if you think if JJ's in there, it probably doesn't happen. But just wait and see on this one. I'd anticipate more announcements on that front, given how unusually lenient the NCAA has been about being able to shuffle people around to keep the team from being hurt necessarily.
Right. Well, you mentioned the injuries, and I kind of agree with you there. I think it's very helpful to get some of those guys a little bit of time to rest. How serious are the injuries? We'll start with J.J. McCargo and Miles Dorn. These were guys that were placed out, pretty much on game day. That was when most people found out about it. How serious are these injuries?
Although, the thing is that unless you're Greg Barnes and happen to have a gazillion sources within the team, most of us don't know because there is no standardized injury procedure as far as letting us know who's limited in practice, who's questionable. Basically the extent of what we can do is go to practice, wait for interviews with the coordinators or some players and check to see who's wearing a red shirt out on the field for who might be limited. We have limited contact or whatever. And that's a lot of people who are high usage anyway, particularly running backs. So it's very hard for us to tell how serious these injuries are because we don't get much information from the team. And so, it's tough to say. The fact that they were game time reveals suggests that they're probably not that serious. If you're not hearing it from somebody else about how serious the injury is, because that usually suggests to me it's probably going to be a week-to-week thing. Right. Which each of them, they're not getting surgery. They do let us know if somebody's out for the year. I will say that. So we haven't heard they're out for the year. But I'd view every injury at this point, unless you hear otherwise, is week to week.
Right.
Yeah,
I feel, offensive linemen, usually those are the types of injuries that you will see with those guys. I know, William Sweets last year was kind of just out of nowhere when they placed him out for the year. But, you don't really know what goes down in the trenches. Just Miles Dorn seemed a little bit weird to me because I thought, there was nothing that signaled anything went wrong in that Cal game. And, nobody said anything about him going down in practice. So that just kind of seemed a little weird to me. But, you look at, Michael Carter, I think this is the area where we're going to see. Maybe he comes back against Pittsburgh. My question is, how big of an impact do you think he will have when he comes back? Is it really going to have any effect? Do you think maybe at that point, that's when the coaching staff says, look, we've got we got 4 guys now in the backfield that can handle a load potentially. Do you think that affects their game planning a little bit?
Well, it might affect their game plan a little bit. I think the impact of Michael Carter is entirely dependent on if the coaches adjust the game plan to having, 3 blacks plus 1. I sort of view Javante as sort of the guy they throw in there when the other guys are tired necessarily. Mm-hmm. He's not really a feature back. But at that point, you got a power guy like Antonio that has some speed, speed guy like Jordan that can try it outside and is, not really a scat back necessarily, but, not as between the tackles as Antonio might be. I mean, you have Michael who's sort of a blend of the two. And so you really have 3 nice options you can use in the running game, and you can use them in the passing game as well, particularly Jordan. And so you got lots of options there. And for me, if I was an offensive coordinator, I would want to use as many of them as I can, run a lot of 3 wide, 2 running back sets, and see what happens. Or 22 personnel or something like that. Just, try some different things out. And I think you'll see more of those wrinkles when they feel like everyone's healthy and everyone's able to go. Particularly Michael, will be going in his junior year, has more familiarity with the playbook, and knows a lot of the wrinkles and stuff that Fedora likes to run with tempo. So it's good for him to get back. But it all depends on the play calling. If the play calling stays the way it is, he's going to be just as good as Antonio was against ECU at his best. And so there's really not a huge difference there in what I expect out of their production, other than, they're going to be fresher because they're able to switch them out quicker, which might help, just them be just a little bit better. But, they're going to have to, call a few more runs, particularly in the second half, even when they're behind, to be able to do that. And, maybe there's some read. I'm not, I don't watch breakdown the stretch film as the coaches do, obviously.
Right.
maybe there's something I missed about why they didn't run the ball in the second half. But, I don't anticipate a huge adjustment necessarily when Michael comes back, but you never know. There might be a big one.
Right. So the last thing that I wanted to ask, we're focusing on the bye week here still. When you look at it, how does this help, mindset-wise, to have this week off and maybe just to kind of step back and reset the entire season?
I mean, it does. I mean, it helps that you're not having to deal with a really, really good UCF team coming in, former national champion UCF coming into town. Pitt's a decent team, but they also were a team that got the barn door blown off of them against Penn State this past weekend. They're a very beatable team. UNC's beaten Pitt every single year I've been in school here. I'm senior this year. So it's a team that, for whatever reason, they have Pat Narduzzi's number. And so I think they'll have some confidence going into that game, particularly now being the home opener for everybody. So I think that's, a real positive to look at. It gives them more time to break down film. Me personally, I am a little concerned that maybe some players from that eastern part of the state, and there are quite a few on the team, might have thoughts, thinking of home and might be worried about that. And so That's obviously needs to be their first priority. But I think it will help them, not have to think about, oh my God, we're 0-2. What are we going to do? And, the team still seems together, which I think is the best positive you can take of, the fairly poor start, is they haven't seemed to given up on one another, given up on themselves necessarily. They never really lost fight at the end of the game on Saturday, even when they were down by a lot on the road and dealing with a home crowd that was, very, very happy that they were losing. So it gives them some more time to do some team unity things to get back on the same page. It gives times for the coaching staff to adjust with their deal and maybe figure out a little more what they have, which I think has been, a little bit of an issue. I think there's still some feeling out of what exactly do we have on both sides of the ball. I think, there's some things that are pretty consistent. Defensive line, I think, is going to be consistently strong. I think the three starting linebackers are going to be consistently strong. But, what are we going to get out of the two true freshmen we're rotating in at quarterback? And, what are we going to get out of our backup safety? Dorn's out and other things. So it gives them a little time to adjust to those changes that they're having to make on the fly. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Pitt, coming off this new bye week now. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave Miami a pretty decent game after that. I think there's a good chance that it could be a reset, like you said.
Yeah.
I think a lot of things with this team are going to come down to coaching. I think you said it earlier, the talent I feel like is there. It's just a matter of coming up with a good game plan and having people buy into that game plan and execute it. That's really the important thing for this team right now.
Yeah, it definitely helps that the two teams that are coming or that we are facing, going and welcoming in Pitt and then going on the road to Miami, that seemed to be two teams that, Fedora's really just had their number. You mentioned it with Pat Narduzzi. He's beaten him every year that he's been in Chapel Hill. That's just one of those teams that no matter what, even in games where Pitt has played really, really well, we found ways to pull it out. That's one of those games that I was kind of happy to see, to start the conference year. And now I think as the home opener, you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of emotion. I really hope, there's a lot of people saying that they're not going to show up, but I really hope that they do, just, if anything, just for the players to try to, energize them and show that they're there to support them. And then, on the road to Miami, that's another one that, I understand, under the Al Golden era, why, Larry had their number, but even last year, they probably should have been the team that derailed Miami's success. Unfortunately, Jordan Brown gets stripped, but we played really, really well in that game. So,
yes.
I feel like, these are two teams that we've had success against. Maybe it gets these guys energized, and if they can win these two games, that would be a huge reset to the season. So, hey, Sam, thanks for stopping by, man. Sam Doughton of the Argyle Report stopping by. Be safe, man. All seriousness, and we look forward to seeing you back out there. And I think now, we're going to be chomping at the bit for the 22nd. I think everybody's going to be ready for that home opener. So,
well, one thing I want to bring up just quickly quickly before we sign off is that I do think that it could be a reset for a lot of the fans right now, because I think a lot of fans obviously had a very sour taste in their mouth after that ECU game. And maybe, a week off of not having to worry about how UNC's playing, and also, perhaps having to, be reminded of, slightly more important things than collegiate football, perhaps, would calm people down, and maybe, it'd be a real uniting thing for the campus community and for the UNC community in general to come out and, come out to the Pitt game. I think there are a lot of people who said they weren't going to show up at the UCF game. I did hear that. But I don't expect that to happen in a couple of weeks. I think people will have calmed down. I think if we were at a 9 after the ECU game, we're going to be down at about a 3 or 4 collectively as a fan base by that point. It'll be simmering there, and if we don't play well, it'll go right back up again. But I think the team's got a real opportunity to change fortunes around, get some confidence back in themselves, back with the fan base. People were running headlines, like the fans were against Larry Fedora. Can Larry Fedora do anything to save himself from the fan thing? And win. That's all he's got to do. And like you said, he's got 2 real solid chances against teams he's done well against in the past for this team to turn it around. And Anthony, thanks for having you on. I always have a blast coming on your podcast. You do a great job, and I've been enjoying your write-ups as well on the Heel Tough blog. And so, thank you for having me on. I look forward to talking to you real soon.
All right, man. Hey, yeah, thank you so much. And, you do great stuff as well. Love reading anything that you write as well on Argyle Report. And then I saw you have your own podcast as well. So maybe I'm having an influence on you guys.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we threw that one out. Argyle Audio, if you want to search for it. I don't know if we're on iTunes, but we're on our Stitcher feed. You can go to argylereport.com. It's one of our latest posts up on there. You can listen to me and Kirk Meyer, who also spent some time around the football team, talk a little Tar Heel football and everything else on campus.
All right, Sam.
Thank you very much, and have a good weekend, and stay safe as well.
All right, man. You too. That's right, Tar Heel fans. I encourage you this weekend, watch a little bit of the other college football games that are going on and just take a breath. Be ready to go for September 22nd against a Pittsburgh team that Larry Fedora has had a lot of success against. Hopefully, the Tar Heels will be able to get their season back on track. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. I want to thank Josh Parcell, Sam Doughton, and as always, Zack Hubbard for stopping by today to talk some Tar Heel football. Listen and subscribe to the podcast on Spreaker, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio. Follow the blog on Medium.com. Just search Heel Tough Blog. Saturday's game with Central Florida has officially been canceled, and as of this moment, there are no plans to make the game up. The Heels are scheduled to face Pittsburgh in Chapel Hill on September 22nd at 12:20. You can watch the game on Raycom Sports or listen to it live on the Tar Heel Sports Network next Saturday. That's 99.3 FM and 1110 AM WBT in Charlotte, 97.9 and 1360 AM WCHL in Chapel Hill, and 106.1 FM WTKK in Raleigh. For anyone listening in the states of North or South Carolina, as well as Georgia or Virginia, especially on the coast, please be safe this weekend so you can be in Kenan Stadium next Saturday. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, go Tar Heels!